But it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Michael Elegbede. I've got it right. We're just talking about, might be our first Nigerian culinary visitor to New Zealand, breaking some new ground for us. And Michael grew up in Nigeria, and when he was 13, his family moved to America. And he spent spare time cooking at his mother's Nigerian restaurant in Chicago. And I think that's a very interesting thing. Michael said to me, have you been to Chicago? And Giapo said what it's like. And I said, it is absolutely full of interesting people. And one of the things that we're seeing worldwide at the moment is people who are uprooted from the land they were born in. They move to another country, the migrants, and migrants is a word that's very in the forefront of all of our minds at the moment. And often it's very hard to find work, but what these people end up doing is turning around and doing something they can do with love, which is cooking the food that they knew and missed from home. And so Michael's roots were in the kitchen there with his mother's food, cooking Nigerian food in America. And of course, being a bright boy, everyone expected he would become a doctor, and he enrolled to be a doctor. But then he realized that cooking was his passion. And so he went and worked in a bakery in Chicago, and then went to the CIA, and that's not where they train the spies. It is the Culinary Institute of America. It has 2 campuses in America, and Michael was lucky enough to go to California, where I think it's probably a little bit more progressive than the one in New York. And he graduated from there in 2013, and then has been refining his skills across America. He worked in a little stage as you would if you were in Napa Valley, in the French Laundry, but his main place of work was the famous 11 Madison Park, which is now number 3 on the world's best 50 restaurants, in New York. And they have an outpost called Nomad. And he's worked in both of those. And I was just saying that I met Will Gadara and Daniel Hum when they came to New Zealand earlier this year. They are fine people and very, very innovative. But last year, Michael made the decision to return to Nigeria. I think it's quite a brave decision after all the comfort of all the fancy stuff that's around you in America. And he's on a mission to rediscover and tell the story of Nigeria's food culture. I've had a peep at his website, and for a foodie, that was a real revelation, if not a challenge, because he has wonderful foods there, photos there of the ingredients that he's been discovering in the markets, produce that's not like anything that we see here. In fact, he cooked a dinner the other night for his hosts, and he was really lucky because he found a Nigerian family here, also living in Dunedin, who were able to supply him with some of the ingredients that were essential to cooking that meal. But he's working on opening his own restaurant in Lagos, which is Nigeria's largest city, and hopefully he will be incorporating all the local ingredients to develop some innovative menus, taking Nigerian cuisine on to the next stage. So you've got a big road ahead of you, I think, but what you've got to do now, and of course what he's obviously going to do too, is he's very interested in the youth, supporting youth to cook too, and allowing the farmers on the fringe of the city to get fair prices. And obviously you've learned several things, especially in Napa you would have. So it's my privilege to introduce you to Michael, and I'm sure he's going to capture our minds.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. How are you? Did you all sleep very well last night? It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much. The last couple of days of me being in New Zealand has been such an incredible experience. Got to see the penguins for the first time. the yellow-eyed penguin, lovely. First, I also love to thank Richard and his crew for this incredible and innovative conference, bringing people from all over the world, different minds, different fields of food, to come and talk about something so important to us. My name is Michael Elegbede. I promise, my name is actually Michael. I hear people ask me that a lot. They're like, "You're Nigerian. How is your name Michael?" I swear, I was named after my great-grandfather, who was also named Michael, after the angel Michael in the Bible. I am here today to talk to you about my food journey and how the multifaceted way that food design has influenced the way that I think about food. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and our food culture is seamlessly intertwined with our traditions and the people in it. I was born into a Yoruba family. Yoruba is one of the major tribes in Nigeria. At birth, food is so powerful, food becomes a means of telling an infant its identity. The moment I came out of my mother's womb, atare was the first thing that went on my virgin tongue. Atare, as you might also know, as grains of paradise or alligator pepper, is one of the indigenous spices of my land and very, very indigenous to my people. My identity, my food, are one and the same. Food has always been a big part of my life. As she kindly mentioned, I grew up with my grandmother and my mother being cooks. My grandmother learned how to cook during the colonization of Nigeria by the British. And there was a French chef in Nigeria, and she apprenticed under the French chef, learning culinary arts and pastry and baking. And after the colonization, she opened a restaurant and opened a store for the young woman to come and learn how to cook from her. Luckily, my parents, they won a visa lottery when I was 5 years old, and they went to pursue their American dream in America, leaving my brother and I with my grandmother for 8 years. In those 8 years, I learned incredible artistry of Nigerian art. And in many ways, things that I didn't understand that I was learning until I started my culinary career. I thought the way my grandmother cooked was the same way that everyone in Nigeria was eating. But I was having boblong, I was having vichyssoise, I was having different things from international cuisine that I didn't know the names of or wasn't aware that it was international food. She would use ingredients from our spice cupboard to make things that have a similar flavor profile to the work she learned growing up. As she also mentioned, as any immigrant family that is pursuing the international and American dream, you go to the States and you say your children, they have to be either doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, anything that is going to bring so much wealth and so much accolades to the family. So I didn't think being a chef was an option for me at all. I loved food, I loved to cook, but it's your hobby. Understand what your hobby is, and you have responsibilities. So work towards responsibilities and money. After doing my undergrad in pre-medicine, I decided life is too short to wake up every morning doing something that I don't love. So I went to the Culinary Institute, as she said, and this was the best decision I've ever made in my life. I started learning food in a very, very different way. I started learning and understanding what food was, difference between culinary art and cooking. Yes, we all cook, but is there a design thinking behind the cooking that we do? That is the difference between when we cook at home and when we create a meal. This is me in Badagry, my father's homeland, making gari. Gari is an indigenous food of our culture. It's made from cassava that is fermented, then kilned in sand. I thought I'd show you a cute picture when I used to be cute. um, pursuing knowledge. She also said, going to Napa Valley, we call it our little Hogwarts. Napa Valley reminded me a lot of Nigeria. Fruits everywhere, farms everywhere. A walk away was Yorkville. Another less than a mile was the Meadowwoods. We had farmers and farm always coming to the school, producing their produce, inviting us to their farms. I had the opportunities to work on many farms throughout my time in Napa Valley. And something changed. I'll tell you a funny story. A young lady came into the school. She's Ethiopian, and I really liked her. And I said, okay, what way? She's not been to Napa Valley before, so how do I impress her? So I said, let me take you to the French Laundry. And you're thinking, oh, wow, baller. You're taking a girl to the French Laundry, you don't even know her? No, when I say I'm taking her to the French Laundry, I mean we're going to go to the French Laundry and peep through the window and watch people eat. So we did that. And as we were watching people cook and eat, the manager came outside and I was like, crap, I've every chance I ever have, I'm screwed. And he invited us into the restaurant and gave us glasses of champagne and started feeding us 3 Michelin star food. Food like this. Food people wait 3 months to get reservations for. And I started talking to Chef Eli, and he started explaining his thinking process and how he understood food. I was like, did you invite us in here because we looked like starving African kids? And he said, no, you guys seem so interested in the food that and everything that is going on that he wanted to share some of that with us. And of course, we couldn't afford it. So the first 3 Michelin star food, the first fine dining experience I ever had was free. And it changed the way I thought about food and experiencing food. Throughout that time in the kitchen, I understood what it meant to use one ingredient in so many different ways, to sit down while we were standing, but to go through a tasting course, and through that tasting course, understand a philosophy. With each course, he explained to us some of these ingredients are from our farm right across the street. And I was so motivated, I was so enchanted. And I requested for an internship, which I got. And just weekends, I was in school, so I couldn't do all of the hours. So every weekend, I would go in, work on the farm, and go into the kitchen. After this, graduating culinary school, I realized I have to continue. I have to keep going forward. I have to find a way to learn in the best ways, people that are so passionate, people that have philosophies that are in line with the ones that I thought I had. So, of course, like any young chef looking to do something really nice, went on Google and where are the best restaurants in America that I can get to? And the best one at the point was in New York, 11 Madison Park. I was like, there's no way I can get into this restaurant, but I'll give it a shot. So I went to New York, I did a stage, simple food I worked, a stage is you work at a restaurant for free for a day. And after the day, I was offered an internship. And after the internship, I was offered a job. Working at 11 Madison Park took me on a whole different level and a whole different thinking on how I perceive food and experiences. This is a carrot tartare dish. This was the first dish I was in charge of when I got to 11 Madison Park. All of those components, that's carrot tartare. So think about a beef tartare. It's grinded tableside, and you get to experience what people would typically experience with beef, with carrot. And this blew my mind. I was mind blown. I was like, this is incredible. And being in New York, I was surrounded by incredibly artistic people, people who wanted to push the boundaries of food experiences. And my brother, also being an industrial designer in California, he started introducing me to people. And in this line, I got introduced to Emily Bolt. Emily Bolt was the keynote speaker at 2 years ago's event at the International Food Design event here in Otago. And we started off just by eating a lot. When you have a food designer and a chef come together, most of the time we would either go to my apartment or her apartment or a friend's place, and we'll roast a whole duck, cook on the barbecue, just do something really fun. And we started realizing we can do things together that can be really, really creative. So the first experience I had with food design was by Emily Bolt. She did this design experience called Traces. Traces, this is not it. Traces is you sit on the table and all the food is served on your hand. And you get to taste and interact with the food with your hand, and you get to experience the people serving it on your hand, and you have no cutlery, you have nothing. This was very reminiscent of where I'm coming from. Nigeria, our food, we eat our food with our hand. Everything we do, we do with our hands with food. So the first project I worked on with Fabio Parasicoli, Fabio Riesling, and Pedro Parasicoli was... I keep mixing the names, sorry. Fabio Parasicoli and Pedro Riesling was this dinner. It's grass on the table, and everything, it's supposed to combat waste. So what do you do when you eat at a picnic? You go to the picnic, you lay on the picnic, you have your different fruits and vegetables, you have your wine, and you have a supposedly good meal. So this is inside a room. There's grass on the table, there's herbs growing out of the table, and every component of the dish, you get to create your own dish. And this was supposed to see how people interacted with something similarly. You usually have a plain table in front of you, and now you have live growing plants in front. Are you going to use those plants when you serve yourself food? And it was interesting to see how this played out, and people interacted. People made different dishes and would take even the grass. People understood that to some point they're edible, and people were using it. All the flowers, all of the mint, all the sage, people ate it. And it was a good way to see my first time seeing how people interacted with a very, very eccentric design. Because that's not how we think when we think of dinners. We think of plates, and we think of a created dish on the plate. The next dinner we did was called Color Feast. Color Feast, I think for me was very, very challenging at the conceptual stage, because this was with Emily Bolt. And what we did was we had 7 different courses. With each course, there is a different light, different sound. And these courses were all Nigerian food. Now think about Nigerian food. Think about African cuisine as little or as much as you know about African cuisine. It's always very bright, very flavorful, very, very bold. So think about Nigerian food, white. Every single plate that came out of the 7 courses were white. So I got to use some of my science background and started distilling flavors of my country and spices to infuse in these white foods. And the purpose was to see how the different lights affected the way people perceived the flavor and the texture of the food. So for instance, if we had ice cream served under red light, red is typically affiliated with spicy and hot. So having ice cream served in a room that is perceived hot, how do people perceive it? Do they still feel that they're having a cold beverage or a cold dessert? So going through all of this, I'm a chef. I'm not a food designer. I did things with food designer. That's the best way for us to collaborate. You have chefs and you have food designers. And collaborating, we get to make things that are pretty cool. But the chefs that I really, really looked up to, I keep seeing these repeated things over and over again in the dish that they created. They had this resonance of nostalgia. They look at their dish, they talk about their dish, and they say, this is a play on what my grandmother used to make for me. This is a play of what I used to have at Christmas time. This is something that is so meaningful to me, and I found I didn't have that. I started losing what soul meant for me as a chef in kitchens. So I took a step back, and I realized that I had to do something with my own food, with our food, with Nigerian food, for me to feel complete as a chef. So I started pop-up dinners in New York. I started 7-course tasting menus, collaborating with restaurants, while still working at 11 Madison Park. So I would work 6 to 7 days sometimes, then prep and start doing those pop-ups and selling tickets, selling just for Nigerian food. And at a certain point, I got called by an investor in Nigeria saying that we see your work in America, and we want to see how we can bring this to Nigeria. And I've already been working on a restaurant project for the last year for Nigeria. So it gave me a really, really good platform to want to go back to Nigeria. But having been away from Nigeria for 13 years, going back to Nigeria, the reality really struck. It's really easy for you to sit here and think of food design. I give you mangoes, I give you oranges. You gave examples of having grapefruit and having to pick up grapefruit and going into your room and juicing it. And in Nigeria, it's very, very challenging to have food design. You have power for 2 hours a week. Water doesn't run in most places, even in the middle class. You have people suffering for the mundane things, and you go in and you see things wasting just because of common living amenities. I got to Nigeria end of January this year, and I traveled to Otago, Benue State. Otago is supposed to be the food basin of Nigeria. And I got there, it was mango season, and there was mango all over the floor, everywhere. Hundreds of mango. It was mango season, so goats were eating mangoes, kids were kicking mangoes, and I was there to learn about their culture. I was learning and eating amazing things in Otago, and I immediately realized that I can't live this. I can't allow this. This is not okay for hundreds of dollars in my mind and money to be wasted on the floor and foods that people can eat. These are not people that are wealthy and just throwing food around. These are people impoverished and are still wasting food because they don't know what to do with it and they don't have the resources. They can't juice it because they don't have juicers. They can't put it in their refrigerator because they're using generators to power their lights in their rooms so that they can be able to sleep at night without mosquitoes. So how do you create food design in such a challenging environment? How do you solve food waste in a place where people are barely able to care for themselves enough to think about food that is wasting? So I I immediately called government officials that I had contact of in Benue State, and we started a project that called Onje. Onje is Yoruba for food. Food, simply food. And what we started doing was rethinking ways to bring people in that community together to stop food waste. So what we started doing with mangoes, for instance, they had great honey, they had great mango, they had great citrus. We started teaching them how to make marmalades. How did we incentivize them to make these marmalades? We said, if you bring us at least 5 pounds of mangoes that you forage from all of these wasting mangoes, you get to take at least a jar of marmalade home. And if you don't want a jar, we will pay you for it. So we started having, within a week, the streets of the immediate neighborhood. This is after being there for 3 days in Benue State. The streets of the immediate neighborhood started getting clear of mangoes, because they would bring them to us. They would wake up early in the morning to find the freshly dropped mangoes, and they would bring them to us for us to make something with it, to give it to them, to give it back to them, or give them money. And they started seeing value in something that they typically fed goats, and typically kids kicked to play soccer. So, but that was not why I was in Nigeria in the first place. I was in Nigeria for something much more that I thought was so much more important, that I thought was so much more needed in Nigeria. I was there to prove that Nigerian food and Nigerian flavors could stand on the culinary grounds, which they can. But Massimo Bottura said something in one of his speeches. He said, being a chef is a call to act. And at that moment in time, I needed to act. And all of the background in food design, and also being one of the founders of FDNA, Food Design North America, in New York, with Emily Balt and all the other food designers, it gave me a design thinking to make that change and make it appropriately as fast as I could to stop that waste as I saw it. So that's Onje. If you want more information on it, I will be glad to give you. We also started combating storage and food waste in markets with Onje. You look at these tomatoes. You've handled tomatoes. You know how fragile they can be. But we have such abundance of them that you see so much pressure pushing down on these tomatoes. This is on the marketplace. So at least a quarter of them are just destroyed in the process of them just dumping all of them in these baskets. And this is as a result of abundance. We have food waste. So we started designing products that they can better use to transport their food stock in a more proficient way. And we're beginning to get funding from the government to do and make this happen. Now, moving on to reason why most of you think I would be here in the first place. Onje is something that we've not shared with the public because we didn't want people to take advantage of the fact that we're helping people use their food better. Iton, however, is the restaurant we're opening by the end of next year. So throughout my journey as a chef, I realized that the way that we viewed our food is so much more important than the way anyone else views our food. Upon arriving in Nigeria, I had a pop-up dinner with Guaranteed Trust Bank, GT Bank in Lagos, and we had people from all over Lagos come and try the food that I was cooking. And before they ate the food, I presented them with indigenous spices from Nigeria. And many of them were asking me, what is this? What is this? What is this? And this is something that I've been out of Nigeria for 13 years. and I still know what they are. And at that moment, I realized this movement, what I'm doing, is more for our people than it is for anyone else and what they think about us and what they think about our food. Our food can be esteemed, our food can be beautiful, our food can take a creative attribute. And that is how we talk about Eton to people. Not Eton is a fine dining restaurant that makes beautiful food, and for everyone to say Nigerian food can be beautiful. No, Eton finds different ways to use our ingredients and use our food to create something more and for us to appreciate ourselves more. I'm going to go through some of the dishes that we created. For instance, very simple. Many of you have had plantain chips and avocado. This avocado is spiced with atare. You remember in the beginning, the spice I spoke to you about, the first spice I ever had, the first substance I ever had in my life, atare, alligator peppers, is what spiced this dish. Typically, plantains are street foods in Nigeria. This is, when we eat our fruits in Nigeria, we just cut them up and, it's very easy to have a different feeling and experience with food in the way we present our food. So this is mango and pawpaw with mint with agbalumo dressing. Agbalumo is African star fruit, and it's very tart, and we incorporated it in what we cook and how we don't typically eat salads like this in Nigeria. So showing them different ways that we can use food that is indigenous to us is also a way that we believe is progressive. Jollof rice. If you ask any Nigerian what is the favorite food of Nigerians, they would tell you jollof rice. So how do we cook jollof rice? How do we present jollof rice in a way that is not just a pound of rice and some whatever protein they want on it? So we had jollof rice with different vegetables and a roasted quail with stuffed mushrooms and atadidi with it. Atadidi is roasted peppers that is cooked with peanut stew. And it goes on and on. We have from the north, suya, agai pepe. So maybe I should tell you a little bit about how Nigeria is geographically spread out. We have the savannah, which is in the north, so most of them eat meat. We have the tropics, where most people eat alternative protein, and we have the wetlands. So what we also try to do with our menu is tell a story of the regions in Nigeria. This dish tells a story of the northern region, where mint is very, very important in their diet. And the spices that we use to make this sauce is the spice that they use in eating their meat in Hausa and Kaduna states. And we have garden egg. Garden egg, as you see, this is almost a play of egg in a basket. So we play with our traditional dishes in a way where it insinuates different design concepts and different storytelling in our food. And the name of the restaurant, Itan, means story in Yoruba. So the idea is for us to tell a story of our people, of our traditions, using our food as a medium. In the past few days, I've been going around and speaking to so many people. And in my time going around, I met someone very, very incredible. I met Ho He Pa Raku Joseph, an incredible man. And with him, I understood a quote by Paulo Coelho, who says, culture makes people understand each other better. And if they understand each other better in their souls, it is easier to overcome the economic and political barriers. But first, they have to understand that their neighbors is, in the end, just like them, with the same problems and the same questions. And throughout me coming from the other side of the world to New Zealand, I still realize, I still see the same problems we share. And I believe the more we share our stories and work together in creating solutions, the stronger we are. Thank you.
I'm not sure. Oh, yes, it's working. That was fantastic, but I'm sure there are a load of questions first. We have a good 10 minutes for questions, so yes, first of all.
Michael, just want to know.
Oh, I'll repeat it to you, yeah. No, but then they can hear.
Thanks very much, Michael, for that. I just want to know, where is your Ethiopian girlfriend now?
What? Oh, yeah, we broke up a long time ago.
Did anyone tell you New Zealand were nosy parkers?
But the French Laundry really helped.
Some more questions. There's got to be some questions. Yes. Okay, the question is, when Michael opens his restaurant in Nigeria, what sort of clientele are you going to be aiming at?
We will be aiming at the middle class to high clienteles. And this is important because we have to, the standards we have to do for our food, those are the clienteles that understand, because most of them are well-traveled. We have a very, very large class deviation in Nigeria where you have people of low class and you have people that are very wealthy and people who understand what it means to experience a dinner in many ways. So by using that platform to have a place to display and share our philosophy and food and having that trickle down to the rest of the society is what we're aiming for. To have a platform where a lot of our indigenous species fruits that are already going extinct because people are not growing them anymore because there are no restaurants or no one using them, incentivizing those farmers to use them is a way for it to trickle down. So we are serving the food to most people that are much wealthier, but the advantage of doing that trickles down to the rest of the society.
And that's fantastic, because I've always maintained that if you want to make, the person who sets the trend is going to be the person out the front, and then other people will copy. So tell us a little bit about the existing restaurant scene in Lagos.
We do have a lot of fine dining restaurants, but it's also fortunate and unfortunate in many ways because a lot of all the fine dining restaurants in Nigeria are international restaurants. So people, if they say we're going to have a fine meal, they mean an international meal. No one ever affiliates Nigerian food to going out to have a nice meal.
And so if I were to come to Lagos and I wanted to have a Nigerian meal now, I would be eating in a much lower...
For the most part.
More street food and cafes and things?
Yes. However, there are emerging trends in cooking those exact same food in much beautiful places, which is really not making a lot of difference. It's just a different clothing on the sheep.
So your take is going to be to kind of style it in a different way?
For a holistic experience.
Right.
Yes.
And so tell us about, question, yeah.
Next year. Great question.
The question was that Michael's not going to open his restaurant until the end of next year. So what's he going to do from now till then?
Fantastic. So like I said, in an example I gave, how design is so easy here. Opening a restaurant, a fine dining restaurant in Lagos, where there is really no infrastructure for it, takes a lot of work. As designers, you understand creating a foundation before building on it. So what we're doing between now and then is creating that strong foundation, investing in farmers, investing for better produce and better sustainability of their produce, investing in them to also grow vegetables that are more indigenous to us, rather than having international produce and just growing international produce. So we're really, really investing in the community first, and the source of our produce that we need for the restaurant before the restaurant. If it was just to open the restaurant and open our doors, we could open this year. But if we wanted to do it right and have a strong example to show to the rest of Nigeria on how food should be created on a high level, we have to do it right, and we have to incentivize them to create produce at the best levels.
Excuse me, Michael, how do you, two questions really. How do you get support to invest all of that into making it happen, to support like who's doing it with you? And secondly, will you actually have Nigerian people or international people come to the restaurant?
Right, the first question was, where is the support going to come from? How are you finding, how are you working through that?
Financially, we have investors, and with every business partnership, it's important to have investors that are that share similar goals as you. So when we say we want to go to a farm in Itired that is growing rose apples because that's indigenous to our land, and we want to give them money to be able to grow this better, knowing that it's going to be better for us in the end, they understand it's important. So we're investing in people so that at the end of the road, it's better for them and it's also better for us.
Well, I think it would be fair to say that in New Zealand, restaurant investors is a relatively new concept, and we're seeing it a bit in Auckland, but it hasn't been, like in New Zealand, it's been a struggle because if a chef wants to open a restaurant, he kind of digs deep himself, and there's not, like, you're taking almost the American model there, aren't you?
Yes.
Of investors, and I mean that works very well. I mean, it works for you and it works for them if you're successful. They're the ones taking the risk.
Yes.
Yeah.
In many ways, I as well.
Yeah, of course.
But the biggest thing to understand is the food revolution in Nigeria right now is at its highest. People now really, really want to eat right. People want to know where their food is coming from. People want to experience food. And this feeling of patriotism in our land is becoming so much more strong. And that's, investment-wise, business-wise, it's a sound move to make.
Yeah,
So-
it's the same story here, even though we're a country of producers. That's our whole economy is founded on food. But we have the same problem here. We're trying to awaken the greater population to exactly that. You had a second question, Sharon.
Do you expect international restaurants to be people come to your restaurant or mainly only targeting Nigerian?
The question is, so these people that are going to come to your restaurant, do you expect that, are they going to be international or are they going to be Nigerian? Is it going to be a mix? And do you think that you'll get international recognition?
Like I said, what our main goal is to change the ideology of food for our own people and our people first. Our goal, we're not aiming for international recognition. We're not aiming for Michelin star. We're not aiming for San Pellegrino. We're aiming to bring a spotlight to our food, first with our own people. And if you see our food, you hear about our food, and you want to join us, we're always welcoming to anyone from anywhere in the world to come. And also, a way that we promote that is having international chefs come into Nigeria to collaborate. We have already set up some chefs that would be coming from different parts of the world during our first year of opening to have a collaborative dinner showing that, yes, this is Nigerian food. However, we invite the world to see it.
And apart from those grains of paradise, that spice, what's it called in Nigerian?
Atari.
Atari. What else does Nigeria export to the world in terms of food?
We're one of the largest exporters of cocoa, yet we still don't have a chocolate making. So if you know, but we also have cassava, we have lots of yam, lots of potato, lots of
Going
vegetable.
to Europe.
Yes, going to, and I guess the biggest one is the seafood. You have, and this is another problem that we share, talking to a lot of people here, that the best of your seafood is going to other parts of the world, and the people of your own land are getting just the scraps.
No, we're fishing for it ourselves, I can assure you.
Well, and so many are fishing for themselves. So that's a big problem that we have. A lot of our great seafood is going outside of Nigeria.
A question here.
Is it envisaged at all for your restaurant to become maybe like an incubator for emerging Nigerian chefs?
The question is about, does Michael envisage his restaurant becoming an incubator for a whole, perhaps new generation of chefs?
That's the goal. We intend to have, and that's why it's taking so long to bring it together, because if we want to create the new emerging trend of chefs in Nigeria, we can't just bring them into a incomplete structure.
No, did you read that article in the New Yorker about the girl from Noma who is cooking in Peru? No, not Peru, in one of the South American countries. And she came from Noma Restaurant, and she did exactly what you're doing there.
Oh,
it would be
fantastic.
worth looking through. I'll see if I can find the link. It'd be interesting
Please.
for all of you to do it, because it was a story about, a long-form story in New Yorker about
Lovely.
exactly about this. So, yeah. Oh, lots of questions now. Here, Patricia.
Still about the chefs, like how is the training there? Are they qualified? Because you were exposed to the best restaurants. How are the local chefs there?
So the existing chefs right now, what is the scene with them?
So our goal is not to find chefs to put into the restaurant. We want to train chefs. We are going to have a 4-month training period before the restaurant opens with all of the staffs in the restaurant. And this is also a way that we introduce international standards. We're going to be having staff that are well trained in the internationally renowned way of doing front of the house services, and to train them, as well as me and other.
So you're really, in a lot of them, you're starting from scratch.
Exactly, and
Because
that's
you don't really
important.
want to take the chefs from the international restaurants.
No, we
because
don't.
they don't have that whole psyche of what you're thinking about.
And to invest in our own people is the best way to go forward.
Yes, question here.
Michael, your speech was wonderful.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, a lot of the issues around identity and using indigenous produce really resonate with me as someone who represents Pacific nations. And I'm wondering, one of the barriers I had when trying to contemporize our indigenous ingredients was from my own people who didn't want to see the produce changed or altered from soul food preparations. Have you had any similar barriers or challenges from your
That was a long question. You just answer it.
Okay. Yes. And when you are doing anything that is worthwhile, you're going to have people that challenge you. And you have to really be concrete in what you're doing and steadfast in your philosophy for you to be able to continue until more people get it.
Change the mindset.
Change the mindset. And we've had so many, even things, very, very small, mundane things. We had, in Nigeria, typically we have cassava, we ferment it, then we sun-dry it, then we pound it into a starch and eat it with a sauce. At one of the dinners, we made cassava chips. And it was like, what have you done with cassava? I'm like, we just made a chip. We fried thin slices of cassava. It's our food. We have the right to cook our ingredients in so many different ways. We need no excuse to do that. And you have to realize, as much as they have the right to cook their food, your food, in their way, you have the right to cook your food in any other way that you want.
Yeah, and I think that possibly you have a lot of people that eat the same thing every day, the same way,
Yeah.
every day, the same meal, repeated, because they don't really think about their food.
No.
Yeah. I'm sure that happens in countries with a lot of poverty. It's
Yes.
enough to get food,
Yes.
yeah, without thinking about it. A question there.
Thanks so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm interested to know about what's impressed you with your eating experiences in New Zealand since you've been here, and after this conference, if you're visiting the other parts of the country.
That's a good question. It's really throwing it back at us, isn't it? The question was, what are your impressions so far of eating in New Zealand, and where else are you going before you leave?
It's been, so amazing. The experiences I've had here, I will have and treasure for the rest of my life. I went to Fleur's place, and it was incredible food. And she was a lovely person.
And you've been staying with a family too,
Yes,
haven't you? So you've been
the
locked up in a hotel
Dropson-
anyway. Yeah.
No, and just being with a family from New Zealand has exposed me to so much of your culture and so much appreciation for
I think
it.
that's really great, and I'm thrilled to hear that. And I've always felt too that you can never get to know a country until you go into someone's home. And when anyone comes, and a lot of people come my way, and I never like to say, let's go to X restaurant, Y restaurant, or Z restaurant, even though I know that could be a fabulous experience for them. I invite them home for a New Zealand roast dinner, and it's so rare that that happens. And I think it's, everyone here should take that to heart. Someone comes in from out of another country, invite them home. Don't be scared about cooking for them. Like, you can just have eggs on toast, but to go into someone's home is really special.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And we're going to Queenstown before
And
I
Wanaka.
leave.
And Wanaka,
Wanaka.
and Hawea. And Middlemarch. I'm dying to go to Middlemarch. Any more questions? I think we can take one. Two? Yeah, we've got two then, because she had a hand up before you, but you're louder. Go on.
Generally speaking, fine dining is associated with a lot of waste. Are you trying to perfect a piece of carrot or something? How
Yes.
are you going to contract that?
It's a waste question.
Yeah, and I think that's another grounded thing. That's another reason why we're training chefs from Nigeria for the most part. Waste is a state of mind. Not that it doesn't happen, but doing it, having the consciousness of waste at that core makes you limit how much you waste. So for me, I'm in a country where so much of the population is impoverished. The last thing I want to do is look at my carrot and say, I'm going to cut off that nip just because it has a strand of...
Or make them all the same
or
length.
make them the same length. Or the way I create is appreciating the produce just for it is and its diversity and its natural attributes. So just the state of mind of the person creating the food is important for as the waste of the food.
And one of the things that impressed me most about your talk was the fact that mangoes, I mean, they're so precious here, they're always imported. Hearing about the way you've dealt with mangoes, so I'm sure the Nigerian food is in good hands. And I promised you a question before we finished.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Amazing. I guess my question is, when you say that there's not a lot of infrastructure or running water at times, how are you going to be designing your actual restaurant? Where are you sourcing the materials for the actual restaurant? And perhaps the things within Patricia's discussion around plates and things that you're going to put into the restaurant. Where are you going to,
Oh, so that is a good question, isn't it? The question was about what Michael's going to source for the restaurant. How are you going to find these things? And, do you have a vision? You obviously got a vision. But how are you going to implement that vision?
You have to realize that Nigeria is a completely different ballgame. The way you would create a restaurant here, you cannot create a restaurant like that in Nigeria. Due to the power and infrastructure, we're thinking of alternative means of electricity. We're working with solar panels to try to see the best way to use combine diesel and solar, because we can't just completely rely on solar. And we're trying to create that sustainability. When it comes to equipment, a lot of our equipment, especially the ones that are more specific, are going to be imported. Plates and things of such are going to be made by the people. We have plates in Nigeria, we have gourds, we have so many things that are indigenous to our culture. And we source from the people for the restaurant. It's a Nigerian restaurant, and that idea is going to resonate throughout every part of it.
Fantastic. Well, we wish you the very best.
Thank you.
And we hope that somewhere there's going to be time for a little blog on your website, which is in its early formation anyway, so that we can follow your journey, because you're going to have a lot of New Zealanders. Probably going to cause the New Zealand exit of tourists to...
You're all welcome.
But I'd love to thank you very much for sharing a part of your world. It looks very exciting. I'd like you to join me in thanking.
Thank you so much.